He... Oh, okay. Not sure how that worked with his animation, but... he's still dead. Rolled bozo. Recently, Legend of Acrius has been getting a lot of love thanks to the Kel's Vengeance activity, where we stuff Skolas into a locker with it. Well, technically we stuff him into a bubble shield, and then Acrius takes his lunch money from within the bubble shield. The point still stands. Acrius is still one of the best heavy weapons in the game, and surprisingly is still kind of slept on by a lot of people. I mean, hell, a ton of people still don't even own Acrius, judging from my comment sections when I talk about it. So between that, and Acrius being my favorite D2 vanilla weapon in the game, I thought I'd make a DPS build video around it, especially with the new episode around the corner, and there's going to be some new ARC stuff to play with, and, you know, Acrius is ARC, so I thought this is the perfect time to talk about it. For those of you not in the know, Legend of Acrius is an exotic shotgun that has the Trench Barrel perk built into it through the Acrius Catalyst, as well as giving it increased ammo reserves. This is also a shotgun that does not require you to hit precision blows to do maximum damage with it. You simply just hit the body of the enemy, and it does massive damage. And if you don't know what Trench Barrel does, basically, when you land a successful melee hit on an enemy, the weapon then gets 3 shots to land bonus damage on that enemy. 50% bonus damage, to be specific. So the base concept is basically melee, 3 shots, melee, 3 shots, and so on. But it gets a little bit more detailed than that, because Acrius has its own unique reload system. What I mean by that is, when you take a shot with Acrius, it would take you the same amount of time to shoot another shot of Acrius as it would for you to just simply reload a bullet. Because of this, you can use this to your advantage, and every time that you shoot Acrius, you press reload before you shoot your next shot, and you don't lose any actual time reloading. So the optimal strategy would be, you melee to get Trench Barrel on, then you take a shot with Acrius, press reload, take another shot, press reload, take another shot, and then you repeat that combo over and over again. That way, you never actually are just standing there having to reload 6 shots consecutively of Acrius and aren't forced to use some sort of dodge mechanic to reload for you, like, for example, concussive reload, hunter dodge, rain of fire, and so on. This is particularly important for this build because one of the exotics we're going to be showing off is going to be Mask of Backers. In fact, that's going to be mostly the exotic we're going to be showing off. And for those that don't know, when you activate Mask of Backers with your dodge is then locked out until the buff for Backers is gone. So you can't just utilize your dodge over and over to reload Acrius because you're going to be starting with the dodge to pump Acrius' damage. To be specific, with Mask of Backers, you will activate your dodge, and then it'll give you a 4x weapon surge, for arc weapons in this case, for Legend of Acrius, and then you'll be locked out of your dodge until that buff is gone. So learning this shoot-reload system is really helpful when using Acrius, and also, if you happen to be playing, let's say, Titan, and you want to use Acrius, this is also very handy because Titans don't have a free on-demand reload exotic for their class, so knowing this combo is helpful to using it on Titan, because Titans also have really good exotics for this weapon, such as No Backup Plans, which is another 50% increased damage buff to utilize. Now, the exotic we are going to be using is Mask of Backers, but I did want to mention one more exotic armor piece that's probably already in the thumbnail, which does basically the same thing, which is going to be Foe Tracer. Now, they're not exactly identical. Foe Tracer will not eat your dodge and just have it at 0% the entire time. However, it does come with its own disadvantage. While Foe Tracer will buff Acrius' damage just like Backers would to X4 Weapon Surge, it will also kind of screw you over because to use Foe Tracer, you have to hit a powerful combatant, let's say a boss in this case, with an ability matching the same damage type, so an arc ability. So because you're using Foe Tracer, you would be either locked into using arc or locked into using an arc ability on Prismatic. And the problem with that is, well, arc just on its own currently until we have Heresy out is not really that powerful. Maybe if there's going to be synergy with Gathering Storm and it getting pumped from one of the artifact mods, which is possible, but currently it's not, so that leaves using something else like Prismatic or Stasis straight up. I think the better of the two is just going to be using Stasis on Prismatic, and that creates a problem for Foe Tracer because if you use any of your other abilities while in Prismatic, which you typically do because you're trying to pump your damage, then that screws over a foe tracer. For example, let's say you're going to use an arc bolt grenade, but then you're going to pop prismatic because you want that 5% extra damage buff for your Acrius with Transcendence. Then if you use any of your Transcendent abilities, it will just override foe tracer, and then you will no longer have that X4 surge, which, you know, is kind of detrimental. So if you happen to not have Mask of Bacchus, then your next best choice will be foe tracer, but I did want to mention that of the two, that Bacchus is definitely better, at least in my opinion. Okay, that's enough yapping about exotics. Let's get to the build. Before that, though, can somebody explain to me what the hell is happening to my cloak on my screen right now? Okay, let me get that eyesore off screen. So, our abilities. First is a super. Of course, we're going with Silence and Squall, because with Bacchus, it's a requirement to have a Stasis super equipped, which is going to be Squall, because that's the only choice. It's not the greatest super in the world, but it gets the job done, and it's the requirement. So what are you going to do? At least it also becomes a stasis debuff, which helps us with one of our fragments. In our abilities, we're going with Marksman's Dodge, not only because it reloads our weapons, but also because the base cooldown of Marksman's Dodge is lower than the other two, that being Gamblers and Acrobats. So that's pretty standard. For our melee, we're going with Snare Bomb, also pretty standard. You can weaken an enemy if you're playing solo. For our grenade, we're going with Dustfield because you slow an enemy and give them a stasis debuff, which will help you again with one of the fragments for this build. For the aspects, currently, they're pretty generic, but this might change with Heresy, with how they're working on Ascension and how Arc will relate to Bolt Charge, so Ascension might sneak in there at that point, but for the time being, it is Stylish Executioner and also Winter Shroud. Pretty standard, you go Invis with Stylish off your abilities, and with Winter Shroud, it's another way to slow an enemy for our fragment. Speaking of fragments, let's go over those now. The first one is one that I haven't really used much, but I think for this build it's actually perfect. It's going to be Facet of Hope, which states, while you have an elemental buff, so basically anything that you do with Prismatic, your class ability regenerates more quickly. The reason why I like this on this build is because once you do use Bacchus and the buff is gone, your class ability is basically at 0. And then, if you still have an elemental buff at this point, which you should, given if you're using Prismatic, then it'll help your class ability come back faster, and that might help you get a second Bacchus dodge off during a boss damage phase. Next is Facet of Protection. This is always a staple in every Prismatic build, but this one in particular because you're always going to be in the face of every enemy and boss, given that you're using a shotgun. So, when you're surrounded by combatants, you are more resistant to incoming damage. That's perfect for an Acrius build. The next one is kind of a just-in-case fragment. It's Facet of Command. Anytime you freeze or suppress a target, your equipped weapons will get reloaded. So Acrius, if you're doing the strat that I mentioned earlier, doesn't really need this, but if you happen to run into some bad luck or something bad happens, then this will come in handy when you throw your Prismatic Grenade, or even your Dustfield, and you freeze the boss. Technically, they won't be frozen, but they'll shatter, and this will proc, and it'll automatically reload your weapon. If you happen to be on your second to last or last shot of Acrius before you have to actually reload, and this procs, then bang, you have 6 shots in your mag again, and you don't have to worry about that. Number 4 is Facet of Dawn. Anytime you throw your smoke at anything, you will then become Radiant, and that will give you more damage. Well, assuming you're not inside of a lot of Radiance already, at least. Because remember, Radiant is getting nerfed in Heresy to 20% instead of 25%, so Well will always be stronger, which it should be, because Well is a super. Anyway, the last one is Facet of Ruin. Increase the size and damage of a burst from your Stasis Crystal, or when you freeze an enemy, which the Prismatic Grenade will do, or the Dustfield. And then the other effect is increase the arrow effect of Solar Ignition, so if there are extra enemies around a boss, then they'll explode too. Now let me quickly go over the rotation and just kind of explain what happens, or at least what I would like to happen in a rotation. First up, you're going to start with just any ability spam that you have when a boss damage phase starts. So if I have my smoke and my Dustfield, I would throw those if I happen to have them. If not, I go straight into popping my Prismatic, and then immediately after I activate Prismatic, I throw my super, do a little animation cancel to save like a second of time. I throw my Squall out because it's a kind of a long animation, and then immediately after that's done, I dodge straight into a boss to activate my Bacchus for the damage buff, and then immediately melee the boss to get Trench Barrel for Acrius, and then go to town on their face. That sounded a little bit weird. Anyway, moving on. So at this point, you have Trench Barrel procced, and you do the reload system that I mentioned earlier. Shoot, reload, shoot, reload, shoot. Now, after you've thrown your first Prismatic Grenade, you might have noticed that you got back a second one, because you're in Prismatic, it comes back very quickly. What you can do at this point is throw your grenade before your melee for the next Trench Barrel, because if you do it this way, it does a little animation cancel, and you save like another second of time, which would give you maybe another extra shot of Acrius during that damage phase, and that's like, I don't know, 150, 200k extra damage. So, you go Grenade Melee very quickly, it does a quick animation, and then you're done with that, Trench Barrel is procced, Then you go back to shooting Acrius. Shoot, reload, shoot, reload, shoot, reload. Now, while all this is happening, another thing to keep in mind is that as Prismatic is up and your buff from Bacchus is gone, your dodge may come back very quickly, and you might get off a second one during that damage phase. So if you happen to have a second one to activate, do so in that damage phase to get that X4 Surge buff back. But honestly, don't stress it if you can't get the hang of doing all of that I just mentioned. As long as you get the basic fundamentals down of this, and you're fighting a boss that's on the ground that you can get close to, Acrius is just going to wipe the floor with them anyway. And now for the armor mods. Excuse the terrible fashion. I was in Kell's Vengeance earlier with the whole Shadestalker bonus, so that's why I have this on. But anyway, for the mods, there's nothing too crazy here. I'll mention some notable ones, like Arc Dexterity and Arc Loader. I think that's pretty straightforward why I have that on. You want to have Arc Reserves on, just to get more ammo for Acrius. In your boots, I would still keep on Triple Arc Weapon Surge, because once Bacchus does run out, if you happen to have orbs on you, which, let's say, somebody popped a well on the boss for you to Acrius them in the face, you will definitely have armor charges going, which means you will come down to at least an X3 Weapon Surge instead of going from 4 to 0. Other than that, it's your usual time dilation for your surges when Bacchus is gone, heavy ammo finder if you're doing multi-damage phases on bosses, a siphon mod for just collecting orbs. I have Lost Signal on, but you can have whatever you want on and then just have a siphon for whatever you're using. Lastly, the artifact mods. There's nothing specific that you want to have on, but I do want to mention that if you're doing overcharge activities, where it says like certain weapons are overcharged, like shotguns in Kell's Vengeance, then having on Anti-Barrier Shotgun would then overcharge Acrius in that activity, and I believe you would then get a bonus damage buff for Acrius in that activity, in case you want to stuff Skolas into a locker, like we mentioned in the intro. Other than that, go out there, have fun, punch bosses in the face, and let them know that Lord Chungus is now taking over their territory. As always, I'll have a dim link for this build down in the description below. Let me know what you guys think. In the meantime, if you did enjoy the video, please consider subscribing today. It does help the channel grow, and is much appreciated. And if you want to go the extra mile, you can leave a like and or comment below. If you don't know what to leave as a comment, you can leave Legend of Acrius as the comment. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.